Well, you develop processes to repeat that,
and that's the key. That's the key. That's actually the point I was trying to make. In order for us to be able to maintain our data, it has to be traceable. It has to be repeatable. And the only way we can do that is by
This week on the Matthew Bird Podcast.
The former owner and president of Visual Precision Solutions, Matthew Craig.
The senior vice president at Sanborn, Brad Adams.
The owner of VCTO Labs, Pete Kelsey.
The reality capture supervisor at General Motors, John Brown.
And no matter what we did, they wouldn't register. And I'm like, what? And I'm embarrassed of this. But at the time, I was completely vapor locked.
And so we assumed that they didn't want to see the conduits. And we spent hundreds of hours. And the very first thing the client said is, where's the conduit?
You end up building out your process. You fail, you learn, you improve, revise your plan, and you keep trying.
If you took a look at the old Mincy scanners, this was, of course, before 9/11, it looked like a bomb. And they look at that and they say, what is that? And I have to go through
security. So do you have any estimate at this point of how many man hours you're able to save throughout the manufacturing process with what you've achieved with all of your digital twins?
And I'm basing the value seen in the data by.
Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming in to the studio today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is our first ever group podcast. Actually having kind of this roundtable discussion with multiple people as opposed to kind of a solo deep dive interview. So
buckle up.
Here we go. Here we go.
This started coming together. John, we were talking and it was like, it'd be kind of cool to have a couple people. And you posed some of the idea. We'd talked about this in the past. We just never pulled it together. And finally it was like the catalyst to say, let's do this. Like you talked to Pete and we're like, let's get Matt, and it came together. And ultimately to me, it became a very cool group. Like I think if we had to come up with a title for this group, it'll be like Reality Capture Legends, right?
I don't know about that.
The Silver Foxes.
Yeah, let's put an asterisk by the Legends part.
Okay.
What did you say?
Well, you guys have been in the industry for a long time, not to point out ages, right? And that's not my goal here. You have a lot of experience. You started with some of the earliest equipment that was available. You've seen a lot of change. So I think it's going to be a fun conversation because I think the goal should be, let's talk a little bit about the past, because I think we can use the past to influence also the future. But to set the stage, we'll do some intros that'll kind of give background about you, but let's go around and introduce yourself and your role. And that way people kind of know what your background is. You can tell a little bit about your background.
That works. You want to start with me? Okay. John Brown, supervisor for reality capture at GM North America. Been there for 13, 14 years. But my background is in civil and survey.
Pete Kelsey, VCTO Labs. Let's see. In the reality capture space, that would be about 2004. Long history in AEC. Still busy in AEC. But I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, got creative and wanted to know where else reality capture would fit. And that's brought me into mass media television.
Awesome.
Always trying new things. So I'm literally here to learn.
Me too.
I'm Brad Adams. I'm Senior Vice President of Transportation for Sanborn Geospatial today. I've been around a little bit, and I got my start in 2000 at Bohannon, Houston, when we had laser scanner number 20-something in the world, and we could not make money with it in Albuquerque. And they said, Brad, take this to Dallas and see if we can make money. So we started scanning Texas roadways in 2000.
Very cool.
Okay, my name is Matt Craig, and my experience has been in the engineering, procurement, and construction business in the oil and gas field. So I worked for M.W. Kellogg for 15 years, and also I worked for Jacobs and KBR. My earliest involvement with reality capture was with photogrammetry from 1995, and then progressed and had my own business starting out with laser scanning in 1999, and had worked not only for service organizations, but also software organizations, and again, engineering the actual consumers of this information. So I have a broad range as far as application. Semi-retired as a consultant today, and almost like a freebie consultant. I always like to help people out when they go through this. So anyway.
That's great. Yeah, same. Well, maybe we kick things off in the conversation with, again, some of you stated the year that you got into laser scanning. I'd love to maybe hear some stories of the first experiences, those early days. I want to hear a couple of those, because I think there's a lot of people that follow us and listen that are they just learned about scanning. They know what exists today, not where some of it has come from. So I think it'd be fun to hear. What was it like early days starting?
I think maybe it starts with, and John referenced this when he called me 2 months ago at this point.
About that time.
And so, as I said, Bohannon Houston, Larry Houston had bought one of the very original laser scanners in the United States. And they were scanning Indian ruins and other things in New Mexico. And we got a little downturn, and literally we were in an owner's meeting, and they said, we can't afford to maintain Texas operations and laser scanning at the same time. And I said, well, then I'm going to leave, because laser scanning is the way of the future. And our COO looked at me and said, okay, if you believe that, take it to Texas and make some money. And so we introduced it to the district surveyor in Dallas, Leonard Wall, and we did some smaller projects. And he finally accepted the fact that it was a valuable technology. And then he said, okay, go scan downtown Dallas. And we said, okay, how much? And he said, all of it. And it was the Project Pegasus. And so we scanned for 6.5 weeks, and we scanned every highway that intersected in downtown Dallas. And the funny part of the story is that we were rolling the card out on the very first day of the very first scan, and the scanner rolled off the card and broke. And we taped it back together, and Leica came out and calibrated it and make sure it was still working okay. And we scanned every day for 6 weeks with a scanner that was taped back together. And it was all great. And that told you how tough the hardware was. And then I still remember the moment that I knew that scanning was going to be something that was going to be here to stay. We were interviewing the engineers for Carter Burgess. And we said, what is it about this technology that benefited this project in your eyes? Because they were the design engineers. And one of the design engineers looked at me and said, it allows me to sleep at night. Because now he could see everything. He didn't have to wonder about clearances. He didn't have to wonder about obstructions. And I thought, okay, if we can allow engineers to sleep at night with this technology, we're onto something.
That's interesting. I want to jump on back of that one there. We had a very similar entrance into scanning at Metco Services, which was civil engineering, primarily land surveying is the group I worked in. Bought a scanner early on and ran into a very similar situation where initially we were going to get in, oddly enough, into automotive. And then automotive kind of had a turn and they decided against it. We're not going to do that work right now. And my boss at the time said, hey, this was a really good idea, but we're not making any money with it. And we still have the bill coming in. You need to figure out how to use it. And so we started applying it to what we did, not trying to look for new work or trying to get inroads into new industries. We're not piping professionals. We're not, in pharmaceutical or doing anything at pharmaceutical type plants or anything like that. We're surveyors. So what do? We do topos. And that's what got us into doing, using the laser scanner as a tool, and back then the big one of the big buzzwords at the time was it's just a tool in the toolbox. And we really kind of lived by that, right? It didn't always have to come out of the truck, but when it did, it really paid dividends for us because we were able to paint the site in a much more comprehensive way than we could with traditional total station and rod. Fast forward to the first spar a couple years into that later, and we had a little bit of experience doing topo with it, and here and there building facades, pretty basic things. You have to remember we were using a scanner that was limited to a 40 by 40 window of capture. So it wasn't like push the button and watch it spin. You pushed the button and you watched your watch spin. And then when it was done, you turned it and you got another 40 by 40 window, and then you had to build that. And it was a very much different way of putting these things together. So we went to the first spar and had an opportunity to sit in the front row to the Bohannon Houston presentation on Project Pegasus. And watching that, truthfully, changed everything for me, because it was like, this is the real deal. Right. I can see what's happening here. And it's not just the simple fact of how impressive the scanning was. 6 weeks of scanning back then on a highway, that's a lot of work. But there was a lot of other ingenuity that went into that you didn't mention. The boom truck that they built and had designed for this scanner that could lift that thing up in the air and put it in extreme angles so they could capture all this fantastic data. And then they showed you this comprehensive and complete point cloud. And I could literally look at it and imagine myself as a rodman or an instrument man working in that environment, but virtual. And it resonated with me in a way that it changed everything for me. And that was when my life completely it turned a completely different direction. And I was just enamored with the technology. So I don't think I've ever even told you that, but it was a huge moment, for me, and just seeing another company out there having the same struggles. Now, Bohannon Houston and Metco Survey Group, they're not the same type of company. We're just a small surveying firm, but it was interesting to see that this big firm was having the same problems, and they figured their way out of it.
And what was interesting is, if you'll remember, they rebranded the laser scanning group at BHI and rebranded it to Laser Geomatics. And so we became branded as Laser Geomatics, and it was only like 4 people. But we rebranded it because we didn't want our competitors to resist using the technology. And so we built it entirely off of that. And the other thing that I think was important to me is I am a design engineer. I had spent a decade having design projects in and around Dallas doing transportation design. So that's why it was so passionate to me to provide better intelligence for the design engineers. And that allowed them to do their job better.
That's awesome. I like the story and the example. I also like, I'm going to say this selfishly, I like that you pointed out that it was being at an event and seeing a presentation from somebody about the use case that completely changed your direction. That's our whole goal with why we're scaling events and like trying to bring together, right? These people who are doing things that in a unique way, that are testing the boundaries, that are put is, even the people who come present, sometimes they don't know how big of an impact they could make on somebody that's watching. But the fact that what we as an industry are doing is really unique, it's advanced, it's amazing technology that has the power to inspire someone to take a change in their career, to try something new. It really is way more powerful than most people, give it credit for.
Agreed. Just to build on that just a little bit more, the presentation was fantastic, but it's what happened down the lobby the next day and after, where that's when the mentorship really started. And they were very, very gracious in explaining what Brad and Jim Flint, who was there, what they had done, their angle, their application of it, kind of the good and bad of the boom truck and all of this. And they were willing to share this with me, at my age and what I was doing. I was perceiving them as a competitor to me, which wasn't even true. But it was just like, I can't believe they're willing to share this with me and kind of mentor me on the way. And it's I still call Brad when I have an issue. So here we are. Fast forward a couple years later, and I'm still calling him and asking him for his advice. And a lot can be said for the same thing with Matt. Same type of learning from. I look at this table as a bunch of mentors to me, and that's what's phenomenal. And I mean that completely. And I want to get it out of the way because it is important to me. Each one of the people at this table had an impact on me, big time. And you may not even know it, but understanding and working with you or talking to you at conferences mostly, it allowed me to kind of get back on track and go, wow, this is a real thing. I see what they're doing, and I see what they're having issue with and what they're extremely successful with, and understanding we're all having the same issues. And that kind of kept me on track and really made me realize this is a future.
Well, to your point, Matt, the challenge that we had in the old days, when laser scanning first came out, none of the original laser scanning companies are there. They were bought out. Mincy was bought out by Trimble. Cyber was bought out by Leica. IQ Evolution was bought out by Faro. Regal and Z&F are really the only two original scanner companies that are left. But once it became commercialized, that's when you really saw the technology take off. The very first scanner I worked with was a Mincy triangulation system. 100 points per second, only worked at nighttime. And the challenge was, and when you listen to vendors, and this is the challenge that most vendors do, they see their tool as the only tool in town. But what they don't see is the application and the value proposition that it does bring. And that's one of the challenges that I had with laser scanning. We always knew that scanning would be a big thing, but we didn't know exactly how the value proposition was going to actually be in the engineering business. My engineering manager, when I transferred out of engineering design from M.W. Kellogg to the reality capture space, said, whatever you do, make this work in our business. And so what we ended up doing, as I always said, let's take a look at this. It does improve field execution, but the problem that we were facing was the turnaround time on deliverables in revamp projects, because in revamp projects, your schedule tight. And usually the deliverables, the value of that deliverable is how quickly you could turn it back over to you. So at that time, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was all model. Not just no survey control, but the best way to get a deliverable was through a 3D model. And the problem with that is that you were compromising an as-is condition solution to fit a 3D modeling solution, because at that time, everything was orthogonal-based modeling. And so your real-world conditions did not even match up with the actual as-built model. And so I took upon myself, with some help from other folks, especially Stone & Webster was one of the very first jobs I did for an engineering company working. So how can we get this data and use it by itself as a basis to do two things? Number one, design verification and clash detection. Clash detection came in from a totally different technology. It came in from, I remember the company, it was Don Mahar's company that did use voxels, and they used that for how you do MRIs. You take a physical 3D object, and it would clash against a group of points, and you would have a clash detection. That changed significant impact, because that's where engineering companies were able to say, okay, now I can see some value, but I don't have to model everything. All I have to do is do my design and do a comparison against the existing data. And that's really, by that time, along with the commercialization of these vendors going out, not these one-off scanners, made it to start scaling even bigger. The market size back in early 2000, if you get 10 million at the most, as far as what you would see, today it's in the $1 billion industry. And it comes down to what you do with that information. Always tell people it's how good your deliverable, better, how quickly you can get it done faster, cheaper, how you can lower your costs in execution, and how you can do that safely. All four of those components together are the critical factors And I always used to tell vendors when they come in, can your technology do these 4 things? If you can't, sorry, I've already got, why should I change? And those are the things that your companies are looking to do. And that's how they determine, measure value.
Let's hope there are a lot of vendors out there who just wrote that down.
They've probably heard it enough from me as it is, I'm telling you.
Pete, how about you? What was one of your early introductions?
Gosh, well, first time I remember being out in the field with a scanner was in Alaska for the Alaska Railroad. And if you've ever taken the train from Anchorage to Denali National Park, you go over this fabulous old iron trestle bridge. We did that bridge.
Fun.
Yeah, it was great. That's the first time I remember using one. But my version of, my North Star, my career was civil engineering, land surveying. I was doing private development design in Phoenix in the early 90s. It was the boom town. Things were great. I knew what LiDAR was because we'd have sites flown, piloted aircraft. So I knew I was familiar with it. But what really grabbed me was noticing, not only with myself, but when, I'm sure we all remember this, when you watch people see their first point cloud. And that, to me, was, well, it meant it's not just me. So I'm not crazy. I knew, but didn't quite yet understand what the business value was. I had a sense of it. But what really drew me in was watching everyone, regardless of whether they worked in a firm like I did or just somebody off the street. They would all react the same way. And and I thought, that is magic. That is strategic. That is, I know there's business here, so I'm going to start hanging around with people smarter than I am to navigate that, to map that. Where are the opportunities? Where is this going to fit? Gosh, and from there, where to go? The connection point, because we all have them here at this table. Of all places, I meet John on Easter Island. Yeah. And, I can remember, it was either the night before or something, and I get up really early, and we're going to go out and scan the statues when it's dark, get away from all these people and all the tourists, and let's take the scanners. Let's go. And for the rest of my life, I will never forget watching the green laser beam in the dark across an Easter Island, Moai on Easter Island, sitting next to this guy going, this is amazing. And to bring it back to, that you had me at hello, thinking, can you imagine what point cloud is going to look like? God. And then when the world saw it, and my world completely changed.
Do you all remember it at the SPAR conference? I forgot what year it was. It was at the Greenspoint Mall, where we, at that hotel in Greenspoint. We call it Guns Point because of the neighborhood. But do you remember that we had just started utilizing a phase-based scanner? And that the problem was a lot of people, the time-of-flight systems that were all out there, the Cyrex and the Regals and so forth. But the phase-based scanner at that time, ZNF hadn't actually brought out their model, but QuantaPoint had actually taken the rangefinder and actually utilized it. And there was a software company called Bitwise that actually created LaserGen. You remember that? So Mark Kluza from LaserGen and Kevin Abbott, who was the programmer behind that, actually took the tools of libraries from the voxels that I mentioned earlier, and were able to literally take the intensity values that were given off of the actual phase-based scanner, and you could generate a 360-degree photograph. And we displayed that And everybody says, well, that's a nice picture. No, that's a laser scan. And really, because now not only was it a 3, because the challenge it always had with point clouds, depending on how dense it was, people look at, what is that? They couldn't understand it, especially in a plant. If you get into a process plant where piping looks like spaghetti, you couldn't make out what was what. But if you had a visual representation, I first coined the phrase visual survey, because that's really what it was. You could actually take a point to point and measure between points relative distance and get within the tolerance levels that you're looking for. But that also had a huge impact because you could take value, and look where we're at now. We're looking at color photography inside these images and the point cloud being color. It's gotten so incredibly. I just wish I was gotten into I wish those tools were when I was a whole lot younger.
And isn't the beauty of it now that, like, if somebody a third of our age, if I can say that, might listen to this, and they're leaning in and excited about this space, you're right. Your instincts are true. This industry, which, if it looked like that on a graph, we were all around down here, and we've talked about this before. To me, there's no ceiling because it can be applied to anything and everything.
Yeah, but it's being commoditized. It used to be a specialty, but now everybody does it. But that's also the negative side of things as well, because when people say, oh, laser, yeah, we do that already, they don't think about what the application is, because we got to go always back to the fundamentals of measurement.
I'm dying to ask all of you guys about exactly that. Tell me about, like, what's like the worst thing that happened to you that you've never forgotten every time you take one out of the field. You know what I mean?
Well, and if I could supplement that point a little bit, I think one of our biggest challenges in the beginning was that we were at odds with the traditional surveyors. And so now the individuals who needed to support the advancement of the technology, the guys who should have led to the understanding of the quality of measurement, were giving us the Heisman. They were holding us off because they viewed that as a direct competitor of what they were doing. And it continues today. It happens today. You will find people who resist mobile LiDAR because it's going to reduce the number of man hours that's going to be applied on a project. And in fact, I told you I was talking to Jim yesterday, and I asked him what his biggest regret was. So we had a great partnership. So Jim Flint was a practicing structural engineer. And I, of course, was a technology engineer and transportation engineer. And so every time I said that is a blue inset, Jim would correct me and say, well, no, it's not really blue. It's kind of, and every time we sat in a sales meeting, I would say something about laser scanning, and Jim would say, yeah, but, and he would give them the negative about everything that I had just said. And so we were this yin and yang to this. And we always had to find the point in the middle where the technology benefited the project, but was viable enough to get it done at an accuracy, a precision, and a cost that made sense.
But even the vendors tried to integrate the laser scanning and survey components. Leica came out with, the P50, the P60, and the P90, and they tried to sell it as a total station along with the laser scanner. That didn't fly very well. But again, the same reason why you were talking about, surveyors saw that as, no, that's nothing. And yeah, you're right. It doesn't compare to a total station, but at the same time, it's fit for purpose of what you're trying to accomplish. We take a look at laser scanning. We take a look at photogrammetry. We take a look at a lot of these technologies. You have to look at the process of what you're trying to accomplish on your deliverable, which should define the technology you use, instead of not seeing, this hammer in every problem is a nail that you got to utilize. And so that's where individuals like Matt is doing with regards to educating in the company. And when people talk to us, you say, is that really the right tool to use? Maybe it's something as simple as a camera type of technology, kind of like what OpenSpace does, not trying to sell it. But at the same time, it's very simplified and it has a genuine purpose versus a sophisticated terrestrial laser scanner. What are you trying to accomplish with this? And that determines what tool really should be. And that's the thing. Even dimensional control, high precision DC work has an application as opposed to what laser scanning has as well. As John talked about with regards to even some of the manufacturing line machines, you have to have high precision in that when you manufacture cars.
I wonder if we'd all agree that that's kind of should be, if not day one of the laser scanning 101 class, certainly week one, right?
Yeah, I've said I think it's more difficult for people to step in the industry today than it was back in the day. Because a while back, there was like 3 or 4 devices, and everybody that did get into it, it's like there was only one option for what that workflow for that device looked like. Today, there's 50 devices. And so people who are entering today, they're like, how do I even know where to start? Like, I'm being told that a Matterport is a scanner and a Navis is a scanner, and there's a handheld and there's a backpack and there's Faro and Leica and Trimble. You can keep going on and your iPhone. It's why we try to talk about it a lot. And, whether it be through presentations at an event or talking about it with individuals in discussion, and even trying to get further with this longer term mission with these committees that we're launching of actually building case study material and working toward guidelines that help people select tools. Because if we want to scale the industry, we need to be able to help the people that are still, entering it now to avoid all the problems that everyone else has faced, right? We talk about it a lot. There's still people today, like as much as we have worked through different workflows to figure out something as simple as scan registration. We could talk about scan registration for an hour, right? Different devices, different workflows, different control. People who start today are not really getting a whole lot of education on exactly what to capture, how to capture it. And so they're still having issues with those very basics of making, how do I actually collect this data accurately for what I'm trying to accomplish? And I'm like, the best way to solve that is pull together the community and start sharing the lessons learned, because nobody should enter the industry today and run into the same issues that have been figured out over the last 10 years.
Yeah. And I was fortunate where I was coming from at the time, where I was early into it, is that, and we were a complete survey company. That's what we did. It just became another component of what we did. And the equipment was integrated into our workflow as opposed to changing our business. And I think I feel like I'm pretty fortunate there because I was lucky because fundamentally we were still surveyors and we just happened to use a really, really cool surveying machine. And we didn't, we were very early on in adding graphics onto our topo plots to kind of get people interested in, what is that picture there? What is that? Well, that's where all this data came from. So we just shoehorned, again, a really cool piece of equipment into our normal workflows. But I also think that a big difference, you mentioned the number of scanners, the number of sensors that are available. Back then, there was only 3 or 4 or 5, right? But also the manufacturers at that time were not, I never remember a manufacturer back then saying you don't need to rely on survey. In fact, that was the opposite. It was this was the base to your reality capture pyramid is survey. And that's regardless of who it was. You could talk to Regal, you could talk to Mincy or Trimble, you could talk to, Leica, obviously. It was fundamental to the technology. And then something happened 10 years into this, where now the big push, and I'm not going to beat up on any specific manufacturer, but it all of a sudden became, we're going to do this in spite of the surveyors. And they created that contention themselves. The manufacturers created it, right?
I just never could understand that. When they started commercializing Trimble and Leica, in the days of surveyors, it's kind of like the guys in their trucks. There's the Ford truck drivers and there's the Chevy truck drivers, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so they're going to buy their equipment, whether it's laser scanner or a total station control. They're going to buy Trimble or they're going to buy Leica, for example. And because of that, they go there. But as you just go through, of all the people that sometimes they would not emphasize survey control in the laser scanning side, and it's like you're saying, this is your core business. This is what you base it on, and this is survey. This is a survey instrument, or it's a visual survey instrument. I always used to say, but the fundamentals still remain the same.
And we all know. Well, I haven't. On all honesty, I haven't thought about this until this moment. This is really interesting. That something happened. We all know what the answer is. It was greed.
Well,
we can sell more scanners.
Well, there's also an uneducated sales force too.
It was also a differentiation in the sales force. What happened is that the business units inside of these large vendors, now laser scanning was big enough to compete with traditional survey. And every one of the vendors had a business unit that worked with laser scanning and a business unit that worked with surveyors. They were competing internally for the same dollar. And now laser scanning was big enough to compete with traditional survey.
And you see it now today with aerial. You see it with mobile mapping and terrestrial. Now they're competing against each other because you hear the same vendor saying, no. Mobile mapping is just as good as terrestrial, or aerial is just as good as mobile mapping. So those are the things that you got to be careful. Again, comes down to what is your deliverable? What are you trying to accomplish? What is the value proposition? And you should have someone on staff who understands what you can get from this and what the results are. If you don't, you're just picking the tool.
Yeah, and to expand on what you were talking about earlier, Pete, about the wow factor of a point cloud, that's an easy sell. I can wow anybody with a point cloud, put a field book in front of them and try to wow them with that.
Ooh, right? Exactly. Can you imagine in the early days putting a point cloud and a laser scanner in front of an architect?
Right.
Where do I sign? This all was we have to have this.
Right. Yeah, but also remember when we tried to do this in the early day, and Revit was the big software of choice, right? And we were creating BIM models, and then we'd go scan the inside of a building, and we were scanning it to get the exacting measurements and the exacting components of the building and of the room, and then we're forcing it into Revit where everything has to be square and flat and perfect, and we battled these challenges on every single, and what brought us here today is the same challenge of manufacturers competing with each other saying, oh yeah, we can get to 2/100ths of a foot absolute accuracy. Why do we don't need anything other than that.
Right.
And they're saying it simply because it says something in a spec and they're trying to compete against everybody else that's out there, whether we need it or not.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's one of my biggest hangups right now is that because, again, I'm passionate about I think we're all passionate about this industry and the technology and really excited to see where it can go. And when it's a disservice is done to it when the whole story isn't explained to a prospective purchaser or a prospective, a high school or college kid that may be looking into getting into this. If you don't tell them the whole story of what needs to be done to get into this, then an iPhone is good enough because now the term scanning has become so generic that anything that can capture data in real time is considered a survey grade instrument. And unfortunately, that's not true. We know that. All of us know that. I think it's easier to learn, be taught by somebody that's not true as opposed to figuring it out down the line when you did a job that somebody's relying on that data. And unfortunately, it caused some sort of a collision in the plant or in the build environment, or maybe the material or equipment didn't fit or whatever. And now you have to explain why this wonderfully robust and immersive and beautiful data is no good.
And fight within the industry, because stuff like that is so poisonous, venomous at an industry level. Yeah, it can destroy a relationship, vendor-client. But then, the word goes out that, laser scanning, it's not for you. There's something problematic with it. And you poison that well. And, the folks who've been doing this a long time go, wait a minute, we've been here before, right? Sooner or later, there has to be education, standards, community. I think I wanted to come here because I knew there were folks who were going to be here doing this longer than me, so I could just listen and just go. Because I've been doing it a long time, but I don't know everything. I will never know everything. What can I learn?
Remember when we, in the early days of SPAR, we had the ASTM ISO 9, and the only one that came out was the neutral file format E57. Because everybody else was using the PTX format. E57, I think was probably the most successful one that we had because it's a governing standard. And that's one of the challenges is that, and then there was the fight amongst the vendors, how do you, because of their specifications, and how do you determine accuracy? How do you determine repeatability and so forth like that? Because they thought that was the most important. It's important, but it's not the most important. It's what that tool is being used for. Standards are very good because they give you consistency. So are work processes, documented work processes at the high level. When I worked at Jacobs, I was involved in the very detailed specifications and work process on repeatability. And we got it down to where we could actually tell you exactly how many scans you need, exactly how much it's going to cost, and it was repeatable. And everybody else copied it because we joint ventured with other engineering companies, and they took that, and then that got out. And I'm still being cursed out by service providers today because they have to follow some of that. And that specification is over 20 years old and needs to be modified. But does it still work? Absolutely. Is it the most efficient? Probably not, because tools are very well defined and but you've got to have that mindset. What are we trying to accomplish? That's what it comes down to, all these tools.
And the other thing that I think about is in the old days, 40 by 40, 45-minute scan, you didn't go out and just start scanning. You had to plan, you had to plot, you had to understand, and you wanted to make sure that you didn't make a mistake, because if you made a mistake, then it's a full day. And in a lot of times, it's a full day in environments that you don't want to be in. I still contend that the closest I ever came to dying is we were doing a project in Dallas in August in a concrete well area with the laser scanning truck, and it's up on the boom. And of course, in those days, nothing could move. And Jim had been in this unair-conditioned van for about 11 hours, and we were on our last scan of the day. And I decided it was time for me to check on the progress, so I jumped on the back of the van, which made the scanner move, which meant that we had to start over for another 45-minute scan. And I thought Jim was literally going to bury me in that location. But those were the things that you had to deal with. It wasn't walk around with the scanner in your hand and just scan everything and it's all going to, it's just going to all work out. You really had to work at understanding what you were covering and getting the targets. You've got to have all the targets in the right spots to be able to be captured. And it required work, and it required stamina, and it required intelligence, and it required diligence to your craft.
Yeah.
That you're challenged to find today.
And they still call it a scan plan, walking a site and reconnoitering and where are we going to put targets and scan positions. Is that still a term?
Well, I like to think so. In most, I'm not sure how much it's employed because the scanners are so much faster and you can redo things much quicker. But I have a very interesting story. One of my lumps that I took was working at a refinery, and I cannot remember the type of a piece of equipment at this refinery, what the name of it was, but it was basically a big exhaust vent piping, big. And it was a mobile or a marathon refinery just on the south end of Detroit. And we went out there, and this is a testament to land surveying. We're scanning with the 2500 and the 40 by 40 window. And it was a long 45 minutes for this position. And then we had to move and scan again. So over time of scanning both sides of this big square box exhaust unit, that we had targets. We actually put targets on this thing as well, located them with total stations. When we got back to do the registrations, that this job took, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 hours out in the field. But when we got back in the office to do the registration, none of the data would register. And it was because the scanner was so slow. We found this out over time, basically on our single point data from our total station, measuring our targets, that when we shot them early in the day, they were in one position, and this thing heated up and expanded. And then as we moved around it, it was cooling and shrinking. And these are the things that, a good scanning person would have known. They maybe would have talked to the process engineers out there to see if there was this, could it happen? Well, none of us knew anything about that, but
we'd never been able to measure anything to that level before.
Right. But had we not had, the survey aspect of it included as well. I hate to keep going back to the survey part, but that is really what taught us that lesson right then, because we could see it in those single specific points. We could see that difference. But I just remember that those were the pains of that really slow scanner, that if something, that was a full day's worth of work lost, and a lot of people, there was a lot of logistics involved and a lot of safety and fire protection that had to be out there with you at that time. So it wasn't just an 8-hour day for 2 guys. It was an 8-hour day for everybody involved.
And those scanners were heavy too. Let's remember, with the tripods and the batteries and
car batteries.
Yes.
Well, the first hour, definitely, you couldn't even get out of the truck.
Oh, no.
It was a small refrigerator in those days.
It was bigger than the mobile mapping systems are today.
Yeah. So you made a reference. Those are some of the troubleshooting things that you learn as well, because when we used to go out, piping would actually use us for locating tie-ins. Well, you go into places where what pipe is not insulated, and you have to remove the insulation. You got to be able to make sure you do it in a timely manner, because you're asking operations to be out there, and that costs money as well. But what we used to do is not only scan the area that was in it, but we'd go into the control room, get the temperature reading, and log that. And the pipe stress engineers can tell you when it cools down how much it's going to move. And that was how they were able to fabricate. So there's a lot of things. I don't care what the technology is, you're still going to run into those problems in an operating condition. When we were doing on a power plant, I was on top of a furnace of a where they were getting ready to put SCRs, these big giant carburetor or catalytic converters, basically is what they were. And the actual generator was off-centered. You can hear it. And if you took a look at the scan when it came off of this, we were using a phase-based scanner. The column was literally doing this. And you didn't know it until you actually saw the deliverable. And so the data was no good. I mean, and they're not going to shut down a power plant in Houston in the late August when it was 102 degrees. And when you come off that furnace, it felt like air conditioning.
Right.
And so those are some of the things, those are the pains of knowing when and how to do certain things like that. But that's always been a challenge.
Yeah. Well, it's learning those lessons because a lot of those opportunities, and they were opportunities to go and work in an industry you weren't normally in. That's when it really started to push us into those different areas and learn. But learning those lessons, I can tell you right now, we didn't get a second project with that refinery, and it wasn't for lack of the technology. we could explain ourselves. We had a valid reason as to why it happened, but had we known things a little bit better, we would have been able to approach it better.
And not only that, but no other scan company went in there and scanned that.
No, and that's what I mean. We ruined it. We more than likely, we more than likely ruined it, and that's just because I'm as guilty of this as anybody. You get to a point where you make some cool data, and now you think you can do it on anything, at any time, anywhere, and it's not always the truth. Most often it's not.
I can remember you reminding me of getting surprised, something I didn't see coming, a screw up in the field. We were scanning a ship, and the ship is tied up at the pier, and the pier is, way inland in this really complex series of channels, and they wanted it scanned inside and out. So we flew it with a drone, and we were using TLS to do the bulk of the ship. And
terrestrial laser scanning, folks.
TLS, terrestrial laser scanning. See appendix. And no matter what we did, they wouldn't register the airborne. And I'm like, what is that? And I'm embarrassed of this now. But at the time, I just remember I was completely vapor locked. And for those of you listening, why didn't they register? Because a ship moves. Even if it's tied up way back and there's no waves or wakes or anything, there's wind and this huge ship is still moving. Motion blur, it's never, ever going to line up. Because we had targets, but, well, how come my targets, but I couldn't get there. And it wound up being such a simple explanation. So I don't know, maybe that's an example.
Well, we had an example of training our clients on the communication necessary when we talk about data delivery of these type projects. We did a 7-mile underground tunnel that had to be done all at night. And the project was specifically done to identify the delamination of the interior of the tunnel. And so we talked with the client. We got exactly what the specs were. Our first presentation to the client, we had taken out all of the internal conduits and everything else because the project was the lamination of the interior of the tunnel. And so we assumed that they didn't want to see the conduits. And we spent hundreds of hours. And the very first thing the client said is, "Where's the conduit?" We walked out of that client meeting, and it was probably the closest Jim ever came to dying because the elevator doors closed, and I looked at him, and I said, "You never even asked?" He's like, "No, it was in the specs." But the bright side of that is that project actually won the very first Technology Innovation Award from the MAPS conference. And we still have the trophy on my desk for, I think it was 2007, 2008, for being able to produce something with technology that people said couldn't be done.
So, you were talking about some of the limitations of what laser scanning, but even the surface materials. So one of the very last projects that I worked on at Jacobs in 2010 was the vacuum chamber in NASA in Building 32, this massive 45-foot door and everything. Well, they were having problems. They had a contractor come out there with a Faro system, got the data, nothing showed up at all. It's because of the gray material that was on the surface of that. So what we did is we were using a contractor, and we took a sheet of that stuff, and we took a ZNF phase-based scanner, and we had to tinker with the settings so the reflectivity would actually come back and actually register. And so when we got in there and we were able to scan it, were able to scan the interior. Now, the purpose of that project was they were gutting it because they had to refit it for the James Webb Space Telescope, and they had to simulate conditions of minus 600 degrees Fahrenheit. And so there was a lot of piping at the very top. Now, if you've ever been in this thing, it's like a 15, 20-story building inside. And you had multiple levels, and so we had not only to use a JLG, or actually a scissor lift with the scanner, and use it remotely, because you couldn't put a person up there because it was moving. But they did a presentation in Houston at SPAR, the Jacobs team that used it. They saved so much money because they found all the errors in the piping that was up there. And if they didn't have that, it would have been had to be reworked. And it was in the millions of dollars. So those are the value propositions that you say. And that actually was presented at the SPARCon. I forgot what year it was. It had to be like 2011 or 12, but it was really interesting. So, but again, technology sometimes it doesn't work straight out of the box. And you got to understand what the limitations are. So you have to go in and you have to sometimes adjust accordingly and then utilize it. You can't just walk away from it, because if you do, you hurt not only yourself, the technology's reputation, as well as the company that is trying to use the information as well.
Yeah, and legal action's no fun.
No, it's not.
Even when you're right, it's no fun.
Even when you're right. What a great point. Yeah. Very expensive, very stressful.
We did a project and we got sued by the contractor. And I actually had to go back and use En-ROADS to identify that what we had done was correct and the alignments that the engineers had provided were not correct. But even still, it cost tens of thousands of dollars. And of course, you're not making all that much profit on a $100,000 laser scanning project, and you don't want to spend 20% of that to give it to lawyers simply because someone didn't understand what you were giving them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have any of y'all run into issues with calibration problems of your equipment in executing projects? That's one of the things I tell people. You just don't go out and rent it from any Joe Blow. You need to make sure you have certificates of actually showing people that you've got this stuff calibrated, because these are very precision instruments, as well as same way with the survey instruments. But that's the education, with individuals. That is the other thing. You need to take a look at your certifications, when was it last serviced, and be able to do that and maintain that. Because if you don't, you're going to pay for it down the road.
That's a great point. And lining that up with the scan counts on the machine. Yeah. Okay, you calibrated it, but scan count, that was 500 scans ago, right? That's a great point.
Yeah,
I've learned stuff.
I've seen some issues with that for...
HTS, Andy Holroyd is very good at being able to maintain that. And if you're in the business of renting equipment, you need to make sure that that's a part of your process. Because if you don't, and a lot of people say, well, it just costs too much money. And let's just say there are some major vendors that had a real bad turnaround time on deliverables. So, you send it off to get service and you may see it 6 months later. And that's not acceptable. We used to have people literally go to Germany, hand carry the device, sit there and wait for them to calibrate it and then take it back. It was cheaper for them to do it that way.
Reminds me of a lesson to the younger viewers out there. If you get into this, don't check your laser scanner as luggage when you fly somewhere. Okay?
Yeah, right.
If it takes a fall out of the back of the truck, you can't use it. You can't use it until you know the calibration is out. It's such an important point. And
if you took a look at the old Mincy scanners that looked like a black tube, this was, of course, before 9/11. It looked like a bomb. And I have to go through and they look at that and they say, what is that? Well, it's a measuring device. And then you carry it. Well, you couldn't carry it on. You had to crate it up and, box. But that's the very first thing they look at that thing. It looked like a bomb.
Yeah, that's the only thing I miss about the old big boxes, the Cyras, and even the early 3000s. They were pretty. I had one anyway, yeah, I miss the durability of those, but you're right. Calibration's everything. We try to stay as close to on a quarterly cadence with them as many as we can. We're fortunate, right? So I know that I live in kind of a different world when it comes to equipment because we have more than most. So we actually do have idled machines that we can pull off the shelf when we send one in, and that gives us benefit. But I made a major mistake with a mobile mapping unit, and just I don't know why, but making the assumption or not even letting it register with me that, hey, that needs to go in as well. And we found out in a data set. Fortunately, since it has 2 units on it, we could see it in the data, but it was something that hadn't registered on our radar until that moment. But it is an extremely important part of the whole thing.
And I just flashed to run Easter Island scanning, and I'd never seen them before. The targets that would swivel and pivot, and I remember, like, what are those? Well, this is my naivete back then. The first thing you said, they're really expensive. Yeah. Just don't scratch them. Because I probably threw one in a case or in the back of a truck or something. And then understanding, oh, right. And then the other one, of course, is targets can't move. So I probably kicked one and don't remember. Maybe you do.
Oh, he tells me about it all the time.
Oh, great. One of the very first photogrammetry jobs we did at Lyondale Basel in Pasadena, Texas, we put retroreflective targets all over the thing, and they would disappear. And then all of a sudden you see the operators, they had them sticking on their hats, hard hats, and they would walk around. It's like, what are you doing? And so we decided, okay, we're just going to have to donate a whole stack of those retroreflective targets so they could actually put it on their helmet. Leave the ones that we posted up alone. And the interesting thing is, this is what I always told the value, again, coming into like an engineering construction business. One of the biggest challenges is that construction never comes off the same control as engineering does. They'll use some other base of control, and they wonder why things don't fit up. So one of the things I said, look, we need to coordinate with a construction sub who you have out there, leave the targets up till after everything is complete so they can resection into the same control that we based our engineering design off of. If you do that, you have a very strong possibility, because it doesn't matter if if you do all your engineering off of laser scan data and construction comes off of a totally different monument system. And that was a challenge when we were working in Texas City. You had 5 engineering contractors and you had one field contractor that was out there. And everyone would set up their own sub-control network off of the main control. And you'd be in the same unit. I used to have piping managers come in and says, hey, I've got these 2 construction packages and their coordinates are totally different for the same columns and the same page. I said, well, what do you normally do? He says, well, we just come off the nearest column line and just do it. And I just threw it out in the air because it didn't match up. So those are the things you have to coordinate. That, again, the least cost activity in any project is survey, but has the most significant impact on the overall project.
Yeah. This will be on the test.
Yeah. I hadn't found very many people who advocate for survey in this industry more than myself until I think now at this table. Maybe you said it a lot. I come from a survey background as well, and I still see that as one of the biggest issues. But at the same time, I think one of the reasons is that there are so many devices, right? And there's so many different use cases. And so there are times that it's okay to not use control, right? But I think to me, the biggest question mark is when and where and how and what type of job or what type of accuracy. And as an industry, like having a way to define that too, so that if you're handing over data, like, is there a way we name the data? Is there a conventioning so that when someone looks at that file, they know, hey, what device did this come from? Or what, level of accuracy or something was it spec'd to? So what's your thought on when not to use survey? Oh no, I feel the cringes. No, I'm just kidding.
If you know, some of the very localized, if you're very local, it's pretty good. I mean, I've tested out, the RTC 360 and how it's very localized. The problem is when you scale any kind of measurement, if you don't check yourself, error propagates no matter what. The further out you go, if there's no way to secondary check that, your error is going to propagate, and that continues to go out. Like, for example, you may scan, I had this problem with designers, you may scan in an area and it's tied into control, but they're measuring something 100 feet away. That is not going to give you the same accuracy of what you designed. I mean, if there's another scan over there, use it, because that's going to give you. The other thing is that when you run into angles, angulars is, the ellipsoid. If you're measuring things in an angle, you're going to have the same problem as anything else. Everything has to be nice and perpendicular. Fundamentals. Do I measure like this with the tape measure, or do I measure like this? What are the best results? You're not going to get a better result than like this. So those are just things. So localized, I would say. Anything that goes beyond and you're adding scans and it scales out further,
I'd even throw in time now with SLAM scanning.
Yeah.
More time as well as distance. Distance is one, time with SLAM especially is another. The longer you scan, or the error is going to propagate.
I think that I feel like there should be a really good, clear definition of what each sensor is and what the expectations are. Nothing, raises my hackles more than when I'm reading a comparison between a SLAM scanner or a SLAM sensor and a terrestrial laser scanner. Why even compare the two? They're not even remotely close to each other. They're both phenomenal, but you can't compare one to the other. And so what I do is the way that I kind of introduce it, because we use everything at GM. We start with everything from a 360 camera all the way up to the Cadillac of our scanning group, which is our terrestrial machines. We kind of classify them by what the need is. And for me, one is we have 360 imagery or the Insta type cameras, and that is for virtual tours and maybe general planning, and then it graduates from there to when we get into SLAM. I will classify it as an engineering tool, but at a macro level, more for space planning. I still feel that way. A lot of people don't, but that's how I feel. And then when we finally get to the terrestrial scanners, I believe that's kind of the top of the line, and that is for hardcore engineering uses. But I have that caveat that it must include the control. So I think on my table, starting with the reality capture from the iPhones or the like, on the left side, no control. Nobody really cares about it. The content is what you're looking for, the space. But if you want it to interact with other pieces of equipment, either their models or any other type of media that you want to include with it, now it needs to have some basis before it can be relied on. But I have a feeling that, you hit on the nail on the head. It has been blurred at this point to where everything is kind of compared the same. I'm going to go out and scan with my iPhone. Okay, it's not the same thing. Well, yeah, but it looks great. Pete showed me a scan of his guitar that he did with his iPhone, and it's phenomenal. I'm like, wow, that looks great.
And they can fuse that straight into an RTC scan or another scan, and it's going to be just great, and nobody's going to know the difference.
Right, but so I think there has to be we need to get away from the generalization of what the technologies are. I think every one of them is valid and has an important place. And I would never tell, somebody that's getting involved in this type of environment from a technology standpoint, don't use that. If it fits with what you're doing, use it. But as you get more and more into the hardcore engineering tools, there's other aspects of it that need to be considered. And I think it really needs to be, it comes from an educational standpoint.
And it starts with, what problem are we trying to solve? because I was fortunate. I showed up in a professional environment about the same time that digital engineering, digital CAD, all of these different things started showing up. And for 40 years now, we've always held this notion that we're gonna have residuals, and we're gonna have the ability to. I was at Intergraph, and we were gonna have microstation files that you could pull up years and years later, and you're gonna use these files, and they're gonna provide all these values. I'll bet one person never pulled up a 7-year-old microstation file and used it for anything else. And it's the same thing here, that yes, we can convince ourselves that there are residual uses for scan data until we're blue in the face. But if they are actually used, it is the exception, not the rule. So use what your project is needing to have accomplished and let it stay at that. And if there are other aspects, then level up from there.
I think, playing on that a bit, as high a level of ground control, accuracy, precision as the budget and time will allow, is the glue that could change that conversation. Is a 7-year-old, DGN or DJI or DGN useful today? Was it tied to the ground? What level of accuracy, precision? That's the first thing I would ask.
Well, that's a loaded question, because having worked at a large refinery down in Texas City, because the benchmark system that was out there, and we're talking very large benchmark system out there, and because all the engineering contractors that are out there doing all the reason, those monument systems had to constantly be updated like every 5 years.
Understood.
And that is a huge challenge. As far as scan data, one of the challenges that we'd be in the same unit, and there'd be another engineering contractor who hired a different scan in the same area using a totally different survey control. And then they put it down the project directory. And then you had engineering designers, oh, I can't find that data. Oh, there it is in this data set. And I'll go over there and do that. And then they complain it doesn't match up. Or they never archived their data. I even wrote procedures on how to archive data. And if they couldn't find it, they would go 3 or 4 years back to find that data. And it doesn't look like that anymore, because it's a snapshot in time.
Well, believe me, I agree with you. There are a lot of variables.
And we can go down the rabbit hole when it comes with the digital twin component, because everyone says, oh, well, we got a digital twin scan. No, you don't, because a laser scan is only as good as the time that you captured that.
Well, and the challenge that we have, of course, I'm in a little bit different environment, right? I'm in transportation, and the entire value of laser scanning is to keep men and equipment off of active roadways. And so if you're then saying, well, I need this level of ground control to meet this level of absolute accuracy, then now we're putting people back into to harm's way. And in a lot of cases, and we've had this conversation before, the need for the project does not match the expected accuracy being asked by the client. And so now your budget and your time are getting elevated because they think they can get this level of accuracy with this investment, but you don't need it. And I can't, on the mobile side, the number of conversations I had with clients that it will cost you half as much money to let me hit a 10th absolute accuracy as opposed to 600s, because of the ability to leverage out my ground control. But they've been sold that we can get 600s, we can get 400s. And whether you can get it and you do need it are two different things.
Right. Agree. If I was 20 years old today, one of the things I would be looking for is there, I'm trying to think of it right, a North Star? Are there unavoidable truths that I should learn to avoid catastrophe? And I fixate, and granted, because it's where I come from, on control. It seems like somewhere therein is a way to make this dream of whatever a digital twin is a reality, because it'll be what makes it useful and not what it has been, which is individual, disparate, low quality.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest benefits to the low accuracy, so iPhone scanning and, even the 360 photos or those really cheap sensors, I think one of the biggest benefits is it's opened the door for companies to touch the technology and see an interest in it and even get their hands on, like, again, mapping your guitar or mapping your room in your house, or it starts spreading the awareness to the technologies. I think the biggest problem is the lack of education past that, right? Is like when you get someone brand new entering the industry or a new company, because even though it feels like we should be past this already, I feel like if you pick up the phone and call 10 architects, 10 engineers, 10 surveyors, half of them might be using the tools. Like, there's a lot of companies that don't yet even use it at all. And the ones that are ready to make that jump now have no idea where to start, and nobody teaches you the difference between the $5,000 cents, the 10, the 15, the 20. Why does it go all the way to 100? Of course, we never want that one. It's just expensive, right? Nobody teaches you the process of when to switch off. But I think the reason I brought the question of like when not to use survey is reality capture in whole is starting to span across use cases that don't need high accuracy. Maybe they don't need to reuse the data. There's the architects that just want a 2D floor plan that they're like, if we go out by hand, it's 6 inches. You're like, we can beat that with no control. Like, you could run out there with a scanner. So I think the biggest thing is like, we need collective education that helps guide people to the right solution. And then also at some point, a way to document what was used and what is the accuracy. Because the other challenge when you get into clients, maybe like using you as an example with NGM, is what happens if somebody goes out there with a certain device inaccuracy for a certain use case, but then because the data was there, someone wants it for something that's a higher accuracy, but that's not how you originally captured it. I've seen that happen where...
Well, and eBay and Craigslist are full of used scanners of people who did not do their due diligence in advance. Don't just go buy a $100,000 laser scanner. Who would do that, quite frankly?
And it's interesting when I'm listening to the conversation, because I work for an asset owner, right? So I scan for my own needs. So it's a pretty easy process we're at GM, because we're scanning at the top level of the accuracy because it needs to fit everybody's need. And it's easier to do it at the highest level of precision, and then use it for the lowest level of fidelity or precision than it is to try to do it the other way. So we go in and we're at the point now where we're as close to what I believe we're going to get with what's considered a digital twin. And you're right, it's a snapshot in time. It's only as good as the last time you scanned it. But we're in a maintenance mode now in 45 facilities throughout the country, where we're going to just be keeping it up to date as best as we can in our plant. Now that's a very broad statement to say up to date, but as up to date with our known changes in the facility that will still be beneficial down the line. So we have to govern what's in our plant. And what's happening from a data collection standpoint, and it starts again from the foundation of survey and the sensors that are being used, and the expectation. But ours starts at the top level of need and trickles down from there. Now, there's other groups in our plants that are a much higher precision metrology than we are, and we don't blur that line at all either. Like, there is a big difference between me scanning. I use the kind of the analogy that I tell you what the house looks like and where the furniture sits. There are people in there that will tell you the subtleties of the wood carving in the furniture, or which way the remote's sitting on the table. I'm just telling you where the table is. And there's So we have, when they're laying presses out and they're laying conveyors out and things like that, it's much higher precision, not what we do. And but there's no blurring of that set of data, other than for content. Then, conveyor engineers may use it for content to see how high white steel is above a conveyor to make sure they can get it in there. But so it for us, it's kind of easy because our approach is do the best you can and let it trickle down from there. But
you develop processes to repeat that,
and that's the key. That's the key. And thank you for bringing that point up, because that's actually the point I was trying to make. In order for us to be able to maintain our data, it has to be traceable. It has to be repeatable. And the only way we can do that is by following the fundamentals and all the way through.
But I will also contend that General Motors is incredibly fortunate that it had an innovative and very impressive stakeholder who grabbed hold of that and said, this is what we're going to do, and then stayed in that position to allow it to replicate throughout the organization. You didn't move over to something else. You didn't take a step back and say, well, it's okay, we're going to try to do these other things. You maintained a level of professionalism that over time has set a standard for what they expect throughout the entire organization.
I appreciate that. And I think it is a testament to our team staying together and being able to be trusted enough to build this over time, because it takes time. Anybody that's provided with the opportunity to invest the proper amount of time into it is going to be successful, right? What I'm seeing is like where things are going now is that data is so valuable. It's so valuable. And I love your upside down or inverted pyramid explanation. When we started 13, 14 years ago or 15 years ago, we had a group of people that were probably 20 strong that cared about our data. Fast forward to today, and that interested group is close to 3,000 people that are viewing our data, and it's growing on the level of 3 to 5 people per day requesting access to our information. And I think it's more a testament. It's a testament to the technology, first of all, but also in the ability to rely on that data for anything you want. I mean, we're doing everything from using it for virtual operator training and embedding work processes into our point cloud data so that it can. None of this has anything to do with modeling. None of this has anything to do with developing another deliverable from it. It's leveraging that data, not. And I know I kind of went off on a rabbit trail there, but I think that to kind of bring it back around, we're fortunate because we can set one standard for data capture and one standard for sensor use and apply it, and then we just maintain it and build it from there, and then everybody's coming and using it.
I think the challenge, though, that you have, you're an asset owner that actually, as Brad just got through mentioning, that understands the value of maintaining control. Now, you go to other owner-operators in the oil and gas industry, like the ExxonMobils, the Chevrons, and all those. They have assets as well, and they are actually starting to move into the digital teams. They actually have their own group that actually evaluates all this and so forth. But again, there's some that are experienced and there's some that are inexperienced, and they're being, I don't know, basically catered to by the various vendors that are out there without really understanding what their end deliverable is. So one of the things that I see today, like with point cloud data, that used to be the end all, because I said, why do you need to model something that you've already captured and you can actually do everything? Now, all of a sudden, you've got meshing technologies like Preview 3D, and that can actually separate and actually can show different mechanisms that are going into that. Then you got to be careful with that, because the accuracy all of a sudden you're adding on top of what your technology, because garbage in, garbage out. If it's not tied correctly, it's going to be incorrect. Then again, you get into this issue of how much, when you get into maintain, how much of this information, what is still relevant, what is not? Do I need to scan this entire bay over again? Can I actually utilize this? That's where the artificial intelligence is going to come in and say, this scan data was done at this time. I can compare it against the existing, and this is the current, filter out this, archive it off. That way I have better performing data. So those are the things that are going to be coming up, and what I encourage vendors to start looking at. There was a young lady that I'm very well familiar, her name is Ava Agapagi, who actually has a PhD in artificial intelligence, who went to Cambridge and got her PhD and did a lot of work on auto segmentation that actually, the company that she worked for at that time during the summer, Aviva, did a lot of things. Now, they've improved upon that, but that's the direction that a lot of companies are going. So it's not only, it's being able to fine-tune and adjust our processes to take advantage of the tools without sacrificing the core fundamentals, what we are trying to promote, which is good work practices on measurement, data acquisition.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to pick up, not to embarrass you, but pick up on Brad's compliment to you and General Motors is, did I hear you right? You said 45 facilities in the United States.
North America, Canada, Mexico, U.S.
Okay, North America. Do you know how many scans? You'd have to guess.
175,000 right now.
So my point is there a greater, truly strategic success story of reality capture than that? That's astonishing, because you started here, and there were probably people saying, he's a witch. It's witchcraft.
Not to my face, anyway.
Right. But you see what I mean? It just seems that has to be how many?
The biggest problem that we face in the company are people. And the fact that John's been able to, over this 20 some odd years, develop it, that becomes the standard process. If new technology may work once, and then they say, okay, and then that project team dismembers, what do? They go back to what they're familiar with. And that's the challenge that you run into. So it has to be, I always told the owner operators, you have to take ownership of your own survey control and manage it as an asset. If it's not managed as an asset and someone takes responsibility, it's never going to work.
Exactly. And if the blueprint of, John, how in the hell did you and General Motors do that? Survey control, standards, an amazing team, and patience of the company to know that something important is going to happen, and then it did.
Diligence to the profession. Diligence to the profession to do it the right way.
It's astonishing.
Well, it is impressive. I'm the beneficiary of a really, really good team. I have no issues about that, But I will say that, we spent many years, like all of us, I believe, it was just interesting hearing it from because I've been in this environment for quite a long time, and I kind of forget that when you're a service provider, it's job by job. And for me, it's my environment, and I'm trying to do this. I know we're building the flying car tomorrow, but the day after we might be building flying motorcycles, and I need to be ready for that. And so we had to come up with a way internally to show the benefit, not so much of the point clouds. That's easy. That's got the wow factor. I can impress anybody with a fly through of a point cloud, but make them benefit from what we can pull from that data, make them a beneficiary of what we're capturing, and then you've sold it. And
that's that crossing the chasm to where you go from zero to hero.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And now we do work for every business unit in the company, right? And it's strange that I work for audit services or GM legal and I'm not saying I work for them. They're all using this data, which 5 years ago, it was only manufacturing. 10 years ago, it was 10 people in manufacturing.
And now it's used in insurance companies.
Yeah.
Every insurance company.
Yeah. It's being relied on. And as I've mentioned this a couple of other times, but our big catalyst was COVID. And it was truly a blessing for us, a horrible blessing, but still it ended up being a benefit because it gave us the ability to show, hey, we can bring this to you, which means business as usual. And not only are you going to benefit, but all these other groups on the that are kind of on the periphery are going to benefit as well. So we've fallen into some really good times with having opportunity, but also had really great management and a lot of support. And we're able to set up a good foundation for being able to go forward and maintain our plants. So we've been very close to the vest internally with doing it only ourselves for a long time. It's out of necessity. We had to, so that we could get it down. And we could also introduce this. 40 plus facilities in the country. It's 40 plus, or in North America, it's 40 plus personalities. And dealing with individuals, each plant is, to me, is its own personality. Different parts of the country are different personalities. So you need to learn how to ebb and flow in these environments. And we only have that one opportunity to fail. And so that's why we held everything as close to the vest as we have. And now we're getting to the point where I think that we're going to have opportunity to have support from service providers. But I'm also watching where the technology is going, and we're going to get to a point where these sensors are either an on-demand capture in the plant, whether it's autonomous or it's permanently mounted, or maybe it's on a gantry. I don't know, but there is something that's going to change, and then the AI is going to be leveraged heavily on it as well.
Right.
So now I'm preparing ourselves to be more of a data librarian, as opposed to the button monkeys. We're going to be handling the data, making sure the data is good, cataloging the data, and then delivering that data out. And that's our focus moving forward. But it's got to be built on that foundation. So it's been a long process.
And did you do the same thing in oil and gas and you in transportation? That kind of strategic, we started at zero and got here.
The biggest challenge that you have in engineering is that, you have project teams that are made from various disciplines. And when you come to a team, you may have a great idea. The biggest arguments I always had was with project managers, because all they're trying to figure out is how much I can squeeze out of this turnip. And they never wanted to pay for pretty much anything. Not to say that I understand they had a responsibility to the customer. But there were good project managers and there were bad project managers. It doesn't matter what tool you're using, even plant design software, whether it's a Viva E3D or PDMS or Intergraph Plant Design or, Smart Plant. I've seen projects successful. I've seen projects fail miserably. It always comes down to the people that actually are running that. The thing is it takes time and effort. You have to have buy-in. The reason why Jacobs did very well is because the VP says, we're doing this on every revamp project we do, period. Done. Nothing. And because we were able to measure the amount of rework that was taking place. You reduce the rework from 6 to 2%, that is a significant impact. Now, you still had to struggle with internal people utilizing the people that shouldn't have utilized this data the best and were my worst enemies are the civil survey group, because they were the ones that if you think about it, and I didn't learn this until I went to the University of Houston in a meeting. If you look at the civil structural survey degree program in college, not one survey course is taught as part of the curriculum. And I said, do you understand what the impact that's going to have when you hire these people into engineering companies that are given the responsibility of maintaining and executing these civil specifications, because they don't even understand survey. And that is the problem that we run into. And the argument they have is we can't get people enrolled into colleges to do that. Because, number one, the state of Texas, it's changed now, but before then, it was you had to have a 4-year degree and 3-year apprenticeship. And if you come out with an RPLS, you may make $80,000 a year. Now, what guy in the right mind would go through 7 years and with student loan bills and try to pay that back and get into a degree program that is not paying off? And those are some of the problems. I sat there and I spoke with, the Texas State Surveyor Board who came to that meeting. I said, this is the reason why surveyors are retiring early and there's no one coming in to backfill it.
Yeah, especially when you consider that 3-year apprentice is cutting line in August and
wearing a reflector vest and on the side of the road.
But Pete, to take your question a little bit different direction, the thing that excites me is where we're heading, right? Because I see this. I've been privileged to be in the dawn of the CAD and the dawn of the laser scanning. And I was in a meeting at a very large Department of Transportation, and the leader of the group stood up and said, I want everyone to understand we are a geospatial organization. Everything we do is based on geospatial intelligence. And there is a component that is we're gonna mobile map every single road, and we're gonna publish and allow the ability to interrogate that data from everyone around. Now, do we think that's going to happen? Probably not. But if we think about what the intent of that comment is, that we are building a comprehensive data conduit throughout organizations of which you take significant digital information, drop it into the arterial, allow it to pass through the organization, and it's being able to pull out. And my entire career, I've been trying to deliver the right intelligence to the right engineer at the right time. And that continues to evolve. And I think it all started at the bottom of the pyramid. This didn't start with CAD. It didn't start with surveying. It started with laser scanning. It started with the ability to capture the complete aspect of a roadway or a room or a building and be able to present that to a novice. And they immediately know what that looks like.
Which I think, another interesting point that comes off that is like, who is the workforce of tomorrow?
100%.
Yeah, it's people that are, right, when they're stepping into college now and trying to decide, what do I want to do with my career? It's like, you can become a YouTuber and make more than, that licensor, right? It's like, how do we actually inspire people to even want to step into this industry and to step into engineering or construction or survey or, and the technology is a huge draw to people. That was my whole journey. I fell into survey, because that's what my dad did. And I got out of music and needed a real job. And I was working on a field crew. And I have no problem telling people now that I've gone the route I'm at, I'm like, I did not enjoy traditional survey work. I was riding around in a field truck in a oil and gas, field. It was 100 degrees outside. I'm pounding nails in the ground. Like, that's not fun work. We still need surveyors. Somehow we need to inspire, still come in and do those roles. But what got exciting was the introduction of the technology. Like, when we found out about scanning, that took my whole career from a very, low paid entry level scan tech in my late teen years to within a couple years having a major engineering company hire me for a corporate manager role where I'm like, I didn't go to college. I don't have a degree. I just know how to use this piece of technology. Now everybody's asking me to come help support. Because I got very excited about it and I started figuring out these different problems that different industries were having that the technology can solve. Now I'm like, that same path I had, if we can take this and create content from conversations, we can expand events, we can invite students in, we can create things that we get in front of them at earlier stages, we can hopefully make some of that change, right? Because the statistics still about the survey industry, they're not getting any better.
And the engineering industry either. It's not getting any better.
So, like, that's one of our missions, right? The 3 words, everything we do with RCN, the three words that we try to, make everything we do fall within are inspire, inform, and empower. So inspire them to get into the industry, show the cool content, make them say, wow. I think we talk about that a lot. Then inform them, like create actual information to explain the tech, to talk about the problems, to talk about the industries. And then the empower piece, I think, is some of what we think is still missing. Is like, if someone wants to raise their hand and actually get into it, where do they go? How do they actually hands-on learn so that they can get a role within the industry, so that they can step into an opportunity? And today, there's very few colleges that I've seen, and I've talked with a lot of universities that actually have training material on this stuff. Like it might get talked about within a construction management course. Like you get a couple classes on like, this is a scanner. Well, that doesn't set you up to come get a role. So today, most of these things are hands-on learning. Like every company's kind of failing forward themselves and they have to train their own people.
So that's one of the interesting. I was able to help U of H get 2 scanners from ZNF. And actually, ZNF has a great program where you can be a partner and they pay and they give you a scanner with the software, which is actually a good deal. I think there's other technical companies that do the same thing. But do you know Craig Glennie, Dr. Craig Glennie?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so Craig is a professor down at University of Houston. He's in the electrical engineering department. He actually is the one that invited me to that civil meeting because he wanted to try to see if we could get the survey as a second minor degree within the civil structural engineering. But again, here's the situation. Here's a man who's got a PhD from the University of Calgary, probably the best geomatics school in North America. But he can't teach survey because he doesn't have an RPLS. And to have an RPLS, you have to have a 3-year apprenticeship with a real RPLS. It's those kinds of things that are. But the technology, you're absolutely right. So it's actually something that I try to tell the folks, you're missing the point. This is the most exciting time of a civil surveyor. It's because this technology is out there. You've got aerial mapping, you got mobile mapping, you got terrestrial mapping and all this stuff. And then you're going to have virtual reality involved with this. All this is going to be tied in, interwoven. And there's not a better time. People will say, well, what's the highest degree enrollment right now? It's mechanical engineering, but people want to get into robotics. But the civil survey component is where the application is. How are you going to actually get into that? And so when you talk to these universities, a lot of them are they're more set up as businesses now. They're more interested in what kind of enrollment and what kind of money can come in as a result, or what kind of grants can I get as a result of that? And that's the challenge that you have to. And then you have to get students. You have to even start younger. I have a good friend, Cameron Lowe, who I've known since he's a great RPLS. He is the president of the Young Surveyors Group, and he goes into all the high schools around the Houston area to encourage, and they take trips up to Washington, D.C. and lay everything out. But it's those types of activities that you have to encourage these young guys that are coming out to help educate them so they can go on and educate even the younger generation to go into that field.
Well, just to build on that a little bit, also, that is the beauty of reality capture, that we were talking about all the different sensors and all the different equipment. What other profession can you start at 12 years old with an iPhone, scanning in your bedroom, and build up from there and not have to worry about, I don't want to say not worry, and I don't want to diminish the importance and significance of college education and all of that, but it's not required.
I think it's going to change in the next few years. Higher education is going to change over time.
Yeah, but I think we're right now at this point, because I'm in the same way as you. I was I surveyed. That's where I grew up, and I don't have a degree, and I didn't do that, but reality capture changed the direction for me. It would have happened earlier for me had I had other sensors available. And now imagine, like I said, a 13, 14-year-old kid can start scanning in their their bedroom or in their backyard, and then they can work up to scanning out in their street with maybe a tablet, and then move or a drone. And gosh, you can do it with photogrammetry, and we have so many tools. And these kids, they soak it up. I mean, and so there's so many different mediums for being able to use to capture it, that this is the way that things are going, and it's so second nature for the young people to live in this virtual environment, and it just pulls them right in, and they understand it. They understand it from a mile away. They don't need to have it explained to them, and they can just and then when you start factoring in the AI and things that are going to start happening, the future is just
the ability to publish and share. I mean, how many times did we literally have to get someone to come look on our monitor to see what we were doing, because we were the only ones who had the hardware and the software to be able to display and show. And now you can, you're publishing things across the world all the time. So it gives the ability to see what can happen.
I've been sitting here thinking about young people, the gaming community. I can remember a turning point as I go back to BC, before CAD, myself. Jurassic Park came out, the movie, and the 3D effects craze went berserk. And every young kid, I was too old by then, I'm going to go to work for George Lucas at ILM. Okay, cool. School started up to start doing that. But the point of this, one of them is, well, how would I do that? Once you start, well, how did they create the effects in Jurassic Park that has led to everything we see today? They went to Maui and surveyed, because you have to establish the real stuff that they then green screen against. So the point here is everything has to be measured. And people will challenge me and say, define everything. Everything.
There's a whole business of that. I'm sure, have you talked to Travis lately? So Travis Rinke, who is big time into the entertainment business, and he's become very, very good at what he did. And he started out as all of us, just doing grunt work in the plant. But, and I keep telling him, I said, Travis, I am so envious of you. It's not even funny. He has the most fun I can ever imagine.
The worst business mistake I have ever made. Bar none. So we got a out of the blue phone call from the production team of Deja Vu. You guys remember Deja Vu?
Yeah.
Denzel Washington.
Yeah, Denzel Washington. Yeah, the scan. Yeah.
We did all the scanning and we are on the credits. Laser scanning provided by Bohan in Houston, scan technician Steve Snyder. And we were, for a long time, the only laser scanning provider in IMDb, all by ourselves. And we were told, all you have to do is have a telephone and an office in LA, and the work will come. But I didn't work for a company like that. We worked for an engineering survey company.
There's the engineer coming out in you.
And I was all for it. I was moving to LA. And there were 12 owners at BH at the time, and we sat around the table and we decided that we needed to stay true to what we were doing. But yes,
Travis,
we were there. I mean, and in fact, the day that Deja Vu came out, my youngest had oral surgery. So the other two kids, and we're in the theater all by ourselves because they'd called us and said, hey, you're going to be in the credits. And so the lights have come up and they're still rolling the credits. And I think it's the third to last line in the credits. It says Laters. And the kids look at me and said, Dad, that was you. It's like, yeah, that was us. And Steve spent weeks down in New Orleans, and it was right after Hurricane Katrina. And it was one of the things Tony Scott and his team helped revitalize New Orleans. And we had our laser scanners down there. And that was the first time they used a scan cloud as an effect. Because when they looked back in time, they looked at the scan clouds that we were actually providing.
Well, it sure was. You could tell it was a siren.
What, 100? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, and in case, I don't want to belabor this too much, but if you're young and listening to us, those of us here, if special effects is your thing, awesome. If civil engineering, land surveying is your thing, we really need you. Awesome. Whatever flavor of engineering, transportation, oil and gas, manufacturing, awesome. But again, reality capture fits all of that, every part of it. And that to me is why I think I've heard you guys say it. I agree that the timing is, I mean, I was excited. We were all excited when we first saw it and got bit by that bug, and we've been in it ever since. But can you imagine now? I'll say it again. If I was 21, I'd be all in.
What I tell people, because I get people that reach out and they're like, I want to figure out how to get in the industry, or they're like, I have a student, right, that's about to graduate high school, doesn't know what they want to do. I see you talk about this all the time and the opportunities. I'm like, today, I would say, look at the iPhone, right? Download the scan app. Most people have an iPhone. They have no idea that you can even download that and start scanning stuff. Nobody knows that exists. Do that. Play with it. Watch some YouTube videos and reach out to a company and just show that you're interested and say that you've done these things and that you play with data and you want an internship, and just step in.
And the beauty of today's world is go on LinkedIn. Connect to a couple of people. I mean, I'm sure we all have profiles, and we all will. I look at LinkedIn all the time, and I interact with people all the time, and I build relationships and understand things.
Yep.
And we're all here to mentor. I mean, that's what I've been doing that my entire career. I've been an evangelist and a mentor 100%, because that's the only way that I'll ever get to retire, is if there's someone here behind me to carry the weight.
Right. And if somebody asked how, I bet we'd all agree. Develop early on. Develop some fundamentals, the measurement technology. Land surveying, that's a winner. Metrology, whatever it is, just understand the difference between accuracy and precision. You don't necessarily have to go get a degree, but understand that, so you don't have to carry the scars that those of us who've been in the trenches forever.
Also understand spatial geometry. The spatial geometry, you don't put all your targets on one wall and expect to tie in, or at the same elevation, right? Those are just some fundamentals that you're dealing with. But you're right. Everything that you build on still has to have a good core foundation. And not only those types of principles, but the hardest thing today for people that I've heard, in the plants, show up on time and pass a drug test.
The basics.
I don't care how smart you are, if you can't do those two things, you're done. And that requires, some good sound judgment, maturity.
Yep.
Because I will tell you flat out, in the oil and gas industry, it is hard work carrying these things around. And, you're being in 100 degrees plus, or even inside a building, and steam, that's another limitation. You got to figure out how to control steam, because laser scanning doesn't work well in steam. And so those are some of the things. It's hard work, but you know what? It's beneficial. I didn't start into laser scanning or reality capture until I was 36 years old. And so, and I've been at it for almost 30 years now. Well, 30 years. And, it's definitely been rewarding, and I've benefited from it. But what I get the most out of it is seeing this industry grow. That's the biggest value that I've seen. We were able to prove this technology has been and it continues to grow. The hardest thing, with photogrammetry was this was a fantastic thing, and it worked great. But the problem was that by the time that deliverable was turned over, the job was already over with. And so it was a great technology, wrong application, and companies were going out. And I remember, I don't know if y'all, who was involved, Mo Ishimi, Mo, who was at Fluor, was at the time, he was saying, you must be happy that we're not doing this anymore. I said, no, because it invalidates the business model. And what you got to have is competition out there. And you're right. There's always this doubt. Well, there's the market. The market is huge. The market is huge and expanding. And you need competition out there. If you don't have competition, it invalidates the business model.
Failure about when Matt and I talked about this before, when I was hiring people, I might look at the resume. But the first question, the only question I was really interested in, I would ask, tell me about a failure. And you could spot the kids who had grown up with helicopter parents a mile away. I've never failed. Next. Right? Or somebody, well, I failed, but it wasn't my fault.
Right.
Next.
Yeah.
And I know we're right. Well, I failed and it sucked, but I got better, or I learned from it, or I, whatever. Those are lessons I won't forget, and I've passed those on.
Yep.
That's exactly what Bill Gates did in Microsoft. He looked for people to promote that actually had failed and were able to actually learn from that.
Yep. Yeah.
I think this leveling up of capturing the as-built environment, whatever medium that shows, whether it is with the iPhone and doing around their house and thinking about, okay, I want to build something and I need a representation of the as-is environment to allow me to understand where to start. And I can scan that with my iPhone, and that gives the opportunity to start looking at a point cloud and then thinking about how to manipulate inside that virtual environment and do something with it. And there is nothing that is as good as experience. Nothing compares to experience, whether it's being in a mobile mapping van driving around or scanning something with an iPhone. Doing it and trying it and failing at it and trying it again is the most important thing to do across the board.
I've talked in quite a few conversations where people are like, there's the research and the building out a plan and there's the testing. It's like sometimes the best way to learn is actually just doing it. It's the action. There's a lot of people who spend a lot of time on the front end and then have no experience. And then there's the people who have no education on it, but just the experience. And I think if you had to pick one or the other, the doing and the learning as you go, you end up building out your process. You fail, you learn, you improve, you revise your plan, and you keep trying. And I think that's a great path toward.
I asked Jim yesterday, why were we successful? What do you think gave us the ability to be successful? And he said, we were not scared to try. If somebody called, we said, yeah, we'll try. We don't know. And the other part is, I think we had the confidence that we could figure out a solution regardless of whether it was with laser scanning or something else.
Mm-hmm.
But if they said, we need this, we said, yeah, we'll try. And then we went and tried. And more times than not, we were successful at what we were doing.
Those are risk takers. And that's something that you have to, without no risk, no reward, right?
And that was the value of having the partnership, right? That Jim and I had, that it allowed us to leverage the qualities of each other to make that move forward.
Which I think is a big point when you're talking about team building. You're talking about building a team within a company. You're talking about building a company is like, you hear that as one of the best recommendations is, you want to find people that have skill sets that you don't have. And you want to fill those different gaps so that each person is really operating in their lane of what they're good at, what they love doing, because then work becomes fun, right? It's not only hard work at that point. And and also this idea of, considering everybody in the organization at every level, right? I think there's been a lot of companies that the culture was like, oh, you're the new kid, you're the young guy, you're the, we'll tell you how it's done. I feel like I'd seen some of that in my earlier years of working. And today you see a lot of culture within companies finding benefit in kind of leveling the playing field when it comes to innovation and like these conversations, because sometimes it's the young kid that walks in that's like, hey, I have this creative idea. Maybe it's not going to work, but have you thought about XYZ? And when you create that opportunity for shared conversation at all levels, I think you find opportunities that maybe you wouldn't have in if that culture wasn't there.
And there's one thing that I can guarantee around this table is none of us got here alone.
Oh, no.
We all were leveled up by the people who we interacted with. And then the other thing that I think is lost is I get accused a lot of times of being a salesman, being a sales engineer, and what you got to understand is every person is a salesman every minute of every day, because all selling is convincing others of what your opinions that are right and what you're trying to do and standing up for your abilities and your programs. I mean, that's what you're a salesman. You sold into GM for years to make your guys successful. It's,
to me, this is grandiose, but I mean it. To me, sales is the secret to life. It's persuasion. It's, come with me. This is going to be great. You're going to love this. Marry me. Or where should we go for dinner tonight? Well, I don't know. Well, let's go here to concessions, come back. Yeah, it's the secret to life. So anyone who cracks on the sales position or profession, see, I get it. It's low-hanging fruit. It's like picking on lawyers. But you know what? Lawyers are salespeople. The art of persuasion. So,
well, and the best salespeople are the salespeople that believe in what they're selling, fully believe in it, and fully understand it.
And they have a reputation, because you can have 10 great jobs and one screw up, and that'll ruin your reputation.
I tell you,
and I'm telling, and that's tough.
Words to live by. I had my boss when I was with Metco, the person that introduced me into scanning, and was actually the one that and he went to our president of our company and talked them into buying an extremely expensive piece of equipment at a time when it probably wasn't the best thing to do, but he believed in it and was Marty Dunn, and who we worked with at Easter Island, and we worked with, you've met at SPARS, and everybody knows Marty, and he believed in us, and he really, really supported me. And he was a professor at the college that taught survey. He was the remonumentation engineer for Macomb County in Michigan. This was a surveyor, hardcore registered surveyor. I mean, the real deal. And he empowered the non-surveyor, the non-college graduate, to come in and do things. So, but the one thing that he always said to me, or he said it to me once, and it stuck with me forever, was, you're only as good as your last job. And it resonated with me. And then, but you're right. I mean, we're selling constantly, but you have to believe in it. You have to know it. You have to, so it's
it's so easy to spot and take the sales person out of it. It's so easy to spot when somebody is not emotionally invested in the topic.
Passion.
Or not genuine.
Perfect word.
And you can read it from across the room.
Yeah, you can. The one thing I wanted to, that Brad said, you're right. This, for those of us who've been in 20, 25, 30 plus years in the business, there's a lot of people that we've interfaced with that have been very important in moving. So, whether, we all do have our talents, but it's our combined talents together that has pushed this industry forward. And it's comes from the vendors, it comes from the service providers, it comes from those who are the consumers of this information and who are able to utilize it in such a way that actually showed value. But I think that's one of the challenges. You have to say, yeah, I was at the beginning, I was at the forefront of all this, but in reality, we were just a part. We were just a cog in the wheel. We just we played our part. And, and that's what life's all about. You have amount of time, make the most of what you can, or to sound like Gandalf, where he says, all we have to do is decide what to do with the time that has been given us. But the thing that you run into is that the selfish people, the ones that want to say, this is my toy, I don't want to share it. Those are the things that actually kill an industry and kill a business and kill and the guys that you say, you don't need to, we've already taken care of all that. Things I've seen that happen where you discourage people and they don't go through that. We need people that encourage. And that's, to me, I think that's, where we go from. That's the stage of my life I'm at right now, is to mentor and to encourage and just to help people understand where we're trying to go to. What are you trying to achieve? It's not the dollars. At the end of the day, it's not how much money that you make, and it's not how much you have, because when we all die, all this is staying behind. It's the people that we influence for good and value that.
And to circle all the way back to the beginning, when we started having success at Laser Geomatics, we realized early on that the success of laser scanning only occurred if the tide rose and brought everybody with it. So you were, don't take this the wrong way, but you weren't special in that conversation. We wanted to share as much as we could with as many as we could. I spent a lot of nights on the road making presentations in forums just like SPAR, because I wanted to bring a profession forward and help people like you and others like you that would allow us to be where we're at today, to see that there was something exciting with this and there was something impressive and important, and it would benefit all of us if it was successful.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I say often is we are one of the most important industries in the world. Like when I'm at hosting one of our events and I'm sharing on space, at this point, I say it almost every single time because it's so much bigger than, oh, there's a cool laser scanner, or like, what's the new XR headset? Or it's like the people in this community that show up to these events to come network, to meet, to present. They are the people building hospitals, designing nuclear, working on substation. Like the world is benefiting from the people that are in this community because we're improving how we build. We're improving safety. We're reducing costs. We're creating jobs. It is such a bigger vision than what sometimes we narrow into, like, how can I just, do this one little thing better? When we look at the whole picture of who we're impacting and what we're creating collectively, it is massive and it's very impactful.
One of the things that's really interesting about this environment, this profession, is the fact that everybody's I think there's a big feeling that sharing experience is not creating a competitor. It's bettering the community. And I think that's one thing that you may not necessarily see in like the land surveying world, right? No, I'm not going to show you how to use this GPS unit because now you're going to go and take my work. It doesn't really exist here. And that's what's really great about it.
We had a situation where a big competitor in Texas, every single presentation, he was in the back of the room. He was making diligent notes. He was learning everything he could. We were doing a project in 635, and they had somebody stop and go into our van and take pictures inside of our van on a project as we were scanning to try to get better information. And they were extremely successful. But you know what? We still had more than enough work that we could do. We still had more projects than we could physically get done. And then we had to partner with them to help us to take the lead on these projects. So if you do your job right, there's always enough work to do. If you mentor people right, there's always enough value to go around. There's always something there for doing the right thing. Do the right thing.
You know what's exciting? We're still at the very beginning. We're still at the very beginning. And it's just going to, and that's the importance of what RCN is about. You got to have this, because if you're not out there helping promote this out there to the general population, you're going to be successful because you're genuine. And the thing is that it also will help others come into the business. And as you're helping others, it pushes you up as well.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I say it all the time because, I built a service company and then I started RCN. And there are people that have genuinely come up at conferences and they're like, I took the risk to come out to your event, but I still was hesitant. I was like, man, is this guy real? Are you fake? Are you really trying to do some scheme here? I'm like, no, my entire mission has become, you talk about the quote of rising tide lifts all boats. I was like, I used to be the boat, hoping the tide was going to rise. I've basically given up my boat to say my whole business now, my whole mission is just working on rising the tide, teaching other people how to be successful with scanners, trying to connect the right dots of understanding of devices, make connections to the right relationships. When a client is like, hey, we're ready to use a service provider, I'm building the relationships, I'm building the ecosystem, I'm building the community to try to fulfill this long-term vision of who do we reach out to when there's 1,000 plants to scan? How do we manage all this data? It's all the things that we've talked about, the education, the needs for awareness, bringing in young talent. It's all those gaps that over the last 15 years that I've seen, that I've heard people talk about, that I've seen at conference presentations. All of those are piecemealing in what we're trying to now solve. And the hope is we got to get other people involved, right? I don't have all the answers. I'm just finding a way to create this platform where I can offer the stage for the right people to come in and talk about what they're doing, to inspire other people. And that comes back to everybody has a part to play, and they're all important. We need the scanning techs, we need the leaders managing those people, and we need the stage to actually come present at, to inspire. We need to figure out how we, tackle working with education. There's a lot of parts to fulfill.
The one thing that I would tell you that I think is very important that we need to communicate to the vendors out there is that there's a key. Interoperability is the key, not proprietary. And unfortunately, what I'm beginning to see now with some vendors is they're trying to make things to the point where they want to be the hardware and software solution to everything with no interoperability. If you don't do that, you're going to die a slow death, because most companies, I don't care if you get a master service agreement, an MSA or whatever, most organizations, big ones, will not sole source everything to an organization. So what you need to do is concentrate in making the best tool that you can make that works on any platform that people will actually use, that they've already built their work process in, and quit trying to reinvent the wheel and replace something. You're not doing people a favor. The only thing you're looking for is a higher return on your quarterly results. That is a short-term basis. If you have tools that interop and grow off of that and improve, you're going to be very successful.
Yeah, new improvements to the technology should complement the workflow, not require a change. And I happen to work in a company that is exactly what you alluded to. They will not buy an all-inclusive package from anybody. If it requires your software and your data hosting and your hardware, we're not going to talk to you.
Next.
Yeah. We found out that firsthand when we were trying to get you guys to purchase a Pegasus system.
Absolutely.
Is like, how do I publish this data? How do I work with it? And we had to have the right answers.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And it's not for lack of want for some of the equipment, right? There's definite reasons we may want to buy things, but we're just we're an 800-pound gorilla, that and our momentum is moving in one direction. We cannot change, and so bad decisions affect us in a really, really, really negative way, and so we're not able to do it.
So, do you have any estimate at this point of how many man hours you're able to save throughout the manufacturing process with what you've achieved with all of your digital twins?
I mean, no, and we don't. I got away from even talking about cost savings because I can't come up with a number. It's cost avoidance is even harder to quantify.
Sure.
But I'm basing the value seen in the data by how many people how it's growing, and the requests are coming in more and more and more. And we've gotten to the point where there's an expectation of data, and they're almost they call me and go, "What do you mean you didn't do this plant? What do you mean you don't have that data? When are you getting it? Is it on the schedule?" Well, no, we need to talk about that. I need it tomorrow. We're at this point now. The value is in, and one thing that I didn't mention is all of our data is there for our supply base as well. So all of the contract companies, the architects, the civils, the anybody that is doing work for GM benefits from this data. So they're still getting the same value in it. They may not be making money off of collecting it, but they're getting the value of that data. And we're also, we're being able, it goes back to, I don't want to rehash it, but we're also able to maintain the quality of it. So the where we've seen the biggest impact from a cost perspective is in the reduction of field orders, right? In having bad data before we do an install. And for us, like any industry, I don't want to say we're more important or it's more of an impact to us, but the bottom line is building cars. And if any delay in that is the bottom line, and it's just not acceptable. So we've reduced that significantly. And the reason I know that is because we don't get phone calls saying this is a problem. We get phone calls saying, "Hey, we need you to do this," and that's what's happened. So, and then the investment from the company is, I think, testament to the believing in the data and really buying into it completely.
The biggest challenge that I've seen in the engineering world, especially oil and gas, engineering companies typically have everything broken down by work breakdown structure, WBS code. Measurement activities are not captured into that. It's culminated into a general, construction or engineering. I guarantee if people understand how much measurement activity, and they could break that down into, they would see the man hours that would actually be shown in that from a traditional. And then you could start doing some comparison. But it gets to a point where you say, okay, as you just got through saying, that's not really where the value is. The value is in the usage, the consuming of this information. Mm-hmm. People always said, well, I only did this for these large cap projects or mid cap projects. And when I was working for Jacobs, with BP, we got it down to low cap. But what do we had to do? We had to actually change the process of how the projects were funded, so you could actually because some of those low cap projects were done in 2 to 3 weeks. But if they had the data, it actually helped them execute much more efficiently. So it changes the process of what you're trying to do. And I remember BP actually monitoring that based on work. But what they monitored was, like when you said, the minimal shutdown time. They measured the rework that was taking place. If you can minimize the rework in the field, that saves significant value. And they measured that by percentage. ENR, Engineering News Record, came out back in 2012, a recording that basically said their typical rework was anywhere between 12 to 20%. And on average, and when I was at KBR, we went over a 50-year, and we showed it was from 6 to 12. And so when we show that we can reduce that down to 2%, that's when you see a significant value in return.
One of the interesting things that's happened with having data available is now when a project is let for a facility expansion, let's say, the data's there and it's available to everybody that's bidding, right? So whether they use it or not is not forced on them. It's not forced on them. We're not saying you have to use laser scan data. We're just saying it's here if you want it. So that's leveled the playing field as well for everybody. But it's also allowed, which I find interesting, it's also allowed companies that haven't gotten into it to kind of dip their toe in it slowly. They may not have to rely on it for their project, but they can certainly see where it would have benefited them through that process. So essentially, we're helping them along as well, the smaller companies, by leveling that playing field, because we can hire the Top Gun big engineering firms to come in and do the job, and yeah, they're going to scan it and they're going to do all this. But what if the smaller engineering firm that may have different approaches can get in here and then they can exploit the benefits of that data as well?
And it also changes, for years, for decades, we heard that data was gold. Data is the differentiator, and that's not the case anymore. Data is the ability to create intelligence from the data is all that matters. Because I was consulting for one company, and they told me that their data that's what they could hang their hat on. And if you needed better data tomorrow, they could run right out there and get it. And I said, okay, but if you can run out there and get it, anybody else can run out there and get the same data. Data is not the differentiator, because data is available almost anywhere. What can you do with it?
And then, but what it did do by having this data available to everybody is internally raised the expectations on contractors that are doing the work for us to say, well, why are we having rework on this job when you had X? So that's where it's changed things for us, and I think in a real positive sense. And I have really good relationships with a lot of the supply base that works with us. I get phone calls from them constantly. The same type of thing. Hey, we're getting ready to bid on this job. You have this, right? Yep, I have it. Okay, good. We're going.
The other thing on that angle that you mentioned before was, by just simply even making the data available, it's taking away the need for your team to figure out how to create all the value out of the data. It's made it available to now thousands of people who are downloading it, figuring out their own way to use the data and get value out of it for their department, for their need, from the insurance to the planning to it's making it accessible for them to start that journey of creativity and innovating their own.
Right. Well, and I mean, now, I do put this as, count this as kind of a feather in our cap. We've provided an opportunity to companies that may not want to make the capital investment into the hardware to still leverage the software and the data itself to be beneficial through their design process without that hardware hanging over the top of them. And we all know the heaviness of that, the burden of that in a company. So I think, from an asset owner's perspective, sitting in this chair now, I look at it and I'm like, that is a cool thing, because imagine what we could have learned if it when I was working in the consulting world. Imagine what we could have learned had that data just been there for us and we didn't have to worry about capturing it. And now we're creating an architectural student that comes into a new company and maybe is doing an internship, and now he just can grab data, or she can grab data that's there and play around with it and see what they can do with it and explore. So
the other one thing I was going to tell you, in proposals, for example, you have different phases of proposals, FEL, front-end loading, 3, 4. In FEL 3, you're looking at 10, 15% plus or minus. You had that data that's current, and they can use it doing their preliminary design. They can get their proposal cost estimates down to less than what the traditional is. And then that way, for a project to proceed, the owner can actually have a better tool to utilize. Because we did this, and we did a scan, and they said, we're we're not going to be able to do this based upon the cost that's going to do that. So they shut the project down. But if they had that early on in the planning stage, then the value proposition that they can actually get and utilize this, and then go back and supplement that data for their detailed design phase. So there's various project phases that you go through. One from a maintenance standpoint, and also from the capital project, or for the operations, for example, OpEx type of day-to-day activities. So those are things, but it needs to be coordinated at that asset level, not the engineering company, because they'll go in and rescan everything no matter what, if it's good or not.
Exactly. So that's where it's at for us. I mean, and I think that's a real good, it's a great place to be. Because especially when you've kind of worked on both sides of the fence. And so, yeah, it's fun times.
Okay. As we start wrapping up, we're going to do a couple last questions.
Okay.
So, you can think about it. I want everybody to answer this one. So, we'll let Pete go first.
Sagittarius.
Okay. The question is, share something as we're moving forward. You've obviously had the history you have and the things you've experienced, but looking ahead, what is something that you're either excited about or maybe still concerned about, even for the industry? Which it could be one or the other, like whatever comes to mind for you. There's either a challenge you still see, or there's something that you see that you're excited about. Just
in no particular order, welcome to the noise in my head. Some of the things we talked about: staffing shortage, lack of expertise, Gaussian splats, radiance fields. To me, it is, well, one, that collapses without people, talent. On the tech side, the next widget, right? What's the next widget? Is it important? Is it relevant? Is it useful? Asking all the challenging questions. Where does it fit? What problems does it solve? What does it not solve? Navigating that going forward, that's kind of my current state.
Cool. Yeah.
I'm excited about where it's going. I don't even think we've touched where it's going. And I think that's what's most exciting and has me wishing I could get the last 25 years back and start today with it. But I'm excited to see. I really liked your comment about how important this industry is to the world. And you don't really, living in a vacuum, you don't always notice that. And it is important. And I just think that as technology continues to at the pace that it's accelerating right now, it's just unbelievable, But also the younger generation right now, the kids, they blow my mind with the things that they can do and the creativity and I think that's what's got me really kind of excited about watching that creativity continue and watching the technology moving at a much faster pace than it has ever. So the creativity and the improvements in the technology are neck and neck, and it's almost one's testing the other constantly, and it's a fun battle to watch. And I think the only concern I would have is, I don't want to sound like I'm complaining all the time about this, but we really need to rein in some of the vendors that are selling equipment with promises that aren't realistic and damaging to potential new people in the industry. I think we need to go back to the time where we were really trying to create something good and get good quality equipment and not sell things just for the sake of selling it. A sale doesn't end a relationship. We come from a time when the relationship was what you were trying to sell. I want a relationship with you. Heck, God, that sounds like old guy stuff.
Those are good. Those are good.
Yeah.
The only concern that I have right now is that this technology is changing and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Data sets are getting bigger and bigger to the point where, even the computational computers, power to manage and utilize this is going to, come to a point where it's just going to bog down. And the thing that I always think that artificial intelligence is going to do is be able to come up with relevant versus non-relevant. We have to have better management tools in place, because if these systems that we have become to a point where they're so inusable, then we're defeating the purpose of it being used by users. Users get frustrated very easily, and they're not going to sit there and wait 20 minutes for an updated model. And so tools that actually work that way. The other thing is concern about, again, I'll mention this as well from John. Vendors need to learn that interoperability is the key. That's as simple as that. If you want to be successful, you may think you have the best tool. You may think that you have the best hardware and software. But at the end of the day, you've got the customer who you're trying to serve. And it's not the service provider. The service provider is struggling with this. They cannot afford to go out, buy 5 different scanners with 5 different pieces of software to produce 5 different deliverables. And the owner-operators are not going to do that either. Simple as that. That's the reason why sometimes they go with one large vendor, whether it's a good tool or not, but they do it based on status and brand as opposed to that. As far as the future, we need more leaders that will actually understand the technology, but also knows how to mentor the next coming generation in helping people. I think you're one of those people, Matt. And I do believe that it'll pay dividends in the long run. You've got a lot of years to be in this business, but I do believe that that's going to be the key.
Thank you. I am so excited that this time has come before I've decided to walk away. Because I've said it before, I've said it to a number of people. We are at the dawning of a digital technology evolution that we haven't seen since pen and ink went away and CAD started. When you look at my area of expertise in transportation, we are seeing a merging and a combining of reality capture and engineering support and GIS and publication, and we're seeing the advent of AI and the ability to share data across networks and have people intelligent enough with good enough tools to interrogate that data and gain intelligence out of it. And we're seeing digital conduits running throughout entire organizations. We see organizations saying, we're in a geospatial organization, which ties everything back to what started in this environment so many years ago. The opportunities are just so widespread that I can see a day that we do have 0 deaths on highways because we've taken as-is information and combined it with the causes of accidents and combined it with different reasoning. And we were able to investigate all of this together in a single data set on a single dashboard and say, well, here are some things that'll help this. And then we can level that up with autonomous vehicles and we can share that data with them. And all of a sudden, GM is making a car that cannot crash or whatever the case may be so that nobody has to go and wonder if they're going to make it home tonight. It's inconceivable to me that in today's world, we're still losing 40,000 people on U.S. roadways. And we can do a better job with that. I look at the day where we can take the data that this community provides, and instead of having an engineer spend weeks and weeks and weeks to do a simple lane reconstruction or to do a ramp reconfiguration, you can use the as-is quality information with an AI ML component and give you a first cut of that in seconds instead of months. And then to be able to evaluate whether that's better. And the engineer will still be involved. But instead of doing it from scratch, he's evaluating the nuances, which means that when we go to construction, it's the best plan available. And I think it all starts here. And I think the opportunity to do that, and we do, we need more visionaries, we need more leaders, we need more people that are willing to get out and shake hands and share their ideas and influence and sell and change the minds of others so that we can deal with this and we can make it a reality. I mean, in transportation, it's interesting because 3 years ago, we were still debating what digital delivery really means. In some organizations, digital delivery was, did the engineer sign a PDF and then it gets locked? And does that mean it's a digital? Right. And now at least we're all getting that digital delivery means that everything is going to be available throughout the life cycle, and we're going to be able to leverage that intelligence. And I've said it more times than you wanted to hear, but it's not about data. It's about intelligence, and it's about what we can gain from what we've collected.
Yep. Absolutely.
Appreciate all of you sharing. Some people ask why I started podcasts in the first place. And I'm like, well, if I go back and think about, like, selfishly, I get to hear from really smart people, before me. I get to ask the questions. I get to extract the information. I also get to share it with thousands of other people. But, it's great hearing, all of this, right? Nobody at the table's like, this isn't going to grow. There's no future ahead. It's very confirming to people continuing to have these conversations and hear from different perspectives, different industries, where they see the opportunity, where they see the frustrations. Simply just discussing this, sharing it on a video, a viewer of this could be the next person that creates the platform that solves the problems we've talked about. It could be the person starting the service company. That's why I care so much about the front end of what those three words that we focus on: inspire, inform, empower. It's like the information's out there. The way to get empowered by coming and working with great people is out there. But the inspiration piece, like getting somebody to think about the fact that they could be that person, to take that step. One quote I love using a lot, it's attributed to a lot of people, but it is, the best way to predict the future is to create it, right? These ideas of like, well, maybe we could build it into every project we do, or maybe we can use that information on roadways to save it. It doesn't happen by itself. Like it takes these creative people who get together and say, hey, I've got the mapping part of this. You've got the AR part of this. We've tested the car part of this. How about we all get together and try to actually make that a reality? And it takes those innovative people stepping outside the box. Love him or hate him. I also like looking at Elon Musk as an example, right? Where it's like, you've created certain things that in the past someone would have said is impossible. Re-landing rockets, or creating cars that run off battery. Like, it takes those people to really change, make something that's world changing. But we have the right people in this industry and in this community collectively that can actually do that. So I appreciate you sharing that. Last question I want to go around. We'll go the other way. Last question is, through your experience, through the things that you've done, we're talking back to the younger professionals. What is kind of a summary of your advice to those people that are starting out their career right now?
It's interesting because most of you probably know my son is in the industry, and Seth was in the van, the very first paying mobile mapping project for the state of Texas, and it was south end of DFW Airport, and we were trying to get clearance to do an aerial mapping project, and we couldn't. And so Seth at 8th grade was in the, and here he is 30 something years old and has 20 years of mobile mapping experience. And I'm so thankful that he gets a chance to work with me at Sanborn. And the advice that I give is be courageous, put yourself out there, make an opportunity to understand things that you want to change, and then understand and evaluate an ability to make those changes. Nothing that is achieved is handed to anyone. And it takes effort, and it takes diligence, and it takes passion, and it takes professionalism. Love that.
Well, and also you have to be a risk taker too. I remember this is in the early days of CAD when we were on the mainframes, and I was going to school during the day, and I had the third shift at night, but I had to manage all the VAX supports, and I remember what the system administrator basically said, what happens if it locks up? Well, you have to shut everything down. And shutting down a VAX is not just rebooting the button. You have to go pause all the hard drives, that go through the procedures, turn the key, and when you turn that key, it just went boom. It was heavy. And then, you had to wait, for a minute and turn it back up. And I remember that's right. And that's where it got scary, because if it didn't come up, there was a lot of damage. I mean, this was a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment. And I remember the system administrator said, well, if it breaks, don't come into work the next day. So he just basically encouraged me to do what I needed to do if something came up. But at the same time, you're going to have to be accountable. Learn to take accountability in every decision that you make. And you can learn that in the very beginning. You cannot be successful without taking risks and being accountable for it. If you mess up, fess up. Keep trying to improve. And that's what I would say. And find something that you love to do, because if you love what you do, you never have to work a day in your life.
I would say that, be humble. That's kind of my thing. Be humble. I don't know an expert anywhere. And I think we all have to be of a mindset that we're never an expert. We always have to be humble enough to ask questions. And that means having people that you're willing to go to. And if you're humble and you stay humble, you have a large group of people that are willing to share back with you. And also, like, I agree completely. Have a passion for what you're going to do. If it's using the iPhone to do reality capture, be the best at it you can, and exploit that passion. So, but yeah, be humble and be passionate, and then everything else will fall right into place, I think.
And can I add one statement? I had a great leader in the early days of BHI, and we had two tenets: treat each other great and lead from alongside. And I think that if you maintain those two perspectives, that you're going to treat everyone great, regardless of what they're doing and how bad they're doing it. And if you learn to lead from alongside, not from the back, pushing them along, or from the front where you can't see, you lead from alongside, then you're going to have a lot more success.
Best I can do is try to rephrase what's already been said. My take on humility, which I totally believe in. There's expertise. There are no experts. Welcome change / manage fear. Meaning, if you're going to innovate, you have to welcome change. So if you get compartmentalized and you're in your lane and you can't see the other lanes, you have a problem. Mind the distractions, which I can't resist. Digital twins, BIM. We're still arguing over what a BIM is. Who gives a shit? Who gives a shit? Focus, right? That's backscatter from people trying to sell and market things. So mind the distractions, and then don't be an asshole.
Yeah. These are all good tips. Yeah. Yeah.
Didn't know we were moving off of PG-13 into the last 30 seconds.
Count on this guy to do it every time.
You left me for last.
Yeah. Appreciate all of the advice, all the stories, all the input. Yeah. I think the last couple things I'd throw in is, if something is catching your interest, pursue it, right? Which I think there's a balance between always chasing the shiny object, but also like there's so many people I think that are out there that are in a role doing something they don't love, that maybe they come across and see something, they see one of these technologies, but then they're like, and they don't take any action toward like going and talking to someone or following up on it or actually taking those steps. And I think that the more that we try to inspire people, it's like inspiration only does so much. We also have to we need those people that take that step.
Right.
We talked about it earlier that like all of this is nothing if we don't actually take the information and act on it and actually do something with it. You can read all the books you want. If you don't take that information and implement it in what you do, the information that came out of the book is valueless. You know, there's no value in it to you if you don't use it. And for me, I think the other thing is finding those people. We mentioned it earlier too. We've all learned from other people, is find like-minded people and surround yourself with them. One big thing I've told younger people in terms of mentorship is like, a lot of people think of a mentor in this traditional way of like, you agreed with me that you're my mentor and we're going to meet together on a weekly basis. You're like, you can actually have mentors that don't even know you exist. How do you learn from them? Like, follow them. If there's someone online or something, like, what are they posting? What are they talking about? You see them presenting at conferences, learn from them and extract from that. You know, find those leaders that are in a lane that you want to be in and follow those people, learn from them. That's like the lowest level of mentorship. They don't even know you're learning, but that's how I started too, right? Like, I didn't know anything when I started. It was going to these events. It was I mentioned earlier, right? You guys were at the first SPAR event, right? Conference. I started going to that early on. I didn't know anybody. Nobody knew I existed. I was there as the like lone survey tech guy trying to learn and see what's happening in the industry. But it was all the action taking and building of relationships that let me build something. And so I try to tell all those that are in the earlier years is you can do anything. Anything is possible today with technology. These things we're talking about with the future, like you have to first believe it's possible. Then you have to, align yourself with others in the industry to learn from. And then you have to be the action taker. It's a combination of all the advice that you guys gave. You combine those things and, you build anything. Go team. All right, guys. Thanks for joining.